The drama surrounding Terence Crawford has always carried a certain electricity that few fighters in the modern era can generate. He walks into every arena with the quiet, calculated confidence of a man who has already seen the ending before. The first bell rings, and on the night of October 13th, 2018, that aura would be put to its most ferocious test yet. The Chi Health Center in Omaha, Nebraska, was packed to capacity with Crawford's hometown faithful, a crowd hungry to watch their champion defend his WBO welterweight title for the first time. But the man standing across from him was no ordinary challenger. José Benavidez Jr. arrived not just as a fighter but as a statement, loud, aggressive, and absolutely convinced that he was the man the boxing world had been sleeping on. What followed over the course of that October night was one of the most compelling, brutal, and emotionally layered fights of Crawford's extraordinary career. A collision of styles, egos, and raw human will that the sport would not soon forget. 2. Understand what made this fight so deeply charged. You have to trace the bad blood back to its origins, which began long before any punch was thrown in anger inside a ring. Benavidez had made it his personal mission to get under Crawford's skin, confronting him in person and declaring to anyone who would listen that Crawford was simply afraid to fight him. He escalated the campaign onto social media with a relentless barrage of insults, expletive-laden call-outs, and sweeping declarations that he would shock the world when the two finally met. Benavidez was not a fighter who whispered his threats. He screamed them. He wanted Crawford rattled, destabilized, and most importantly, emotional. When asked about Crawford's reputation as one of the pound-for-pound best in the sport, Benavidez dismissed it entirely. He saw nothing special. He believed the boxing community had constructed a mythology around a man who, in his view, could not survive contact with a truly dangerous opponent. Benavidez believed himself to be that dangerous opponent, and he was not shy about saying so at every possible opportunity. The tension between the two camps became so suffocating that promoters were forced to house them in entirely separate hotels. Throughout Fight Week, an extraordinary measure that underscored just how volatile the atmosphere had become. Things finally boiled over at the final weigh-in, when Benavidez shoved Crawford with both hands, a provocation so blatant it demanded a response. Crawford swung a wild right hook that Benavidez slipped with impressive reflexes, the kind of lightning. Instincts that reminded everyone watching that this challenger was genuinely dangerous and not simply a loud mouth with no substance to back it up. Benavidez laughed it off afterward and delivered one of his most memorable lines of the entire pre-fight circus, telling reporters he hoped Crawford would swing faster come Saturday because he had seen that punch coming from a mile away. The Beer Theater was complete. Both men had drawn lines in the sand, and one of them was about to discover exactly what happened when you pushed a champion of Crawford's caliber past the point of respect. Going into the fight, Crawford had made a promise to himself and to the watching world. No matter what happened inside that ring, no matter who emerged victorious, he would not shake Benavidez's hand afterward. It was the kind of declaration that fighters occasionally make in the heat of pre-fight emotion. But those who knew Crawford understood that when he said something, he meant it. He carried that promise with him as he walked into the arena to the roar of his hometown, and it gave his performance that night an edge of something beyond mere competition. This was personal in a way that transcended belts and rankings. The opening rounds established the complex tactical puzzle that this fight would become. Benavidez came out aggressively, stalking Crawford with a fighter's confidence that bordered on arrogance, taunting him between exchanges as if the mental game was just as important to him as the physical one. Crawford, to the delight of the television analysts and the bewilderment of Benavidez, responded by shifting stances. He moved into his southpaw stance and began working his jab with a surgeon's precision, using it to measure distance, manage, range, and slowly begin mapping the geography of his opponent's defenses. The jab became Crawford's instrument of both offense and intelligence gathering, and the ringside commentators marveled at the sophistication of it, noting that there was a smile on Crawford's face when his jab landed cleanly, a little nod of acknowledgement to himself that the information he was collecting was exactly what he needed. The first round was genuinely competitive, ending with Benavidez landing a solid combination that forced Crawford to respond in the most Crawford way imaginable, by sticking out his tongue and grinning. It was an act of defiance, and theater rolled into one, a message sent without a single word that Benavidez had not hurt him, and more importantly, had not rattled him. Benavidez was succeeding in keeping Crawford tentative with his counter-punching instincts, disrupting the champion's rhythm just enough to stay in the fight intellectually, even as Crawford began to find his range. The commentators noted that Benavidez was firing back with his own jab, making Crawford hesitant to commit too fully to his left hand, a genuine tactical wrinkle that showed this was more than just a showcase for the champion. As the fight moved into the middle rounds, the narrative began to shift in the way it so often does when Crawford is involved, gradually, methodically, and then suddenly all at once. Crawford made a decision that would prove decisive over the course of the evening. He turned his attention downstairs, digging heavy shots to Benavidez's body with a consistency that started taking its toll in ways that would only become fully visible later in the fight. Body work in boxing is an investment, a tax levied against an opponent's physical reserves that collects with interest as the rounds accumulate. Every shot Crawford buried into Benavidez's midsection was a withdrawal from a bank account that the challenger could not afford to keep hemorrhaging. Crawford's footwork was a constant companion to this body attack, his feet always finding the right angle, always positioning him outside Benavidez's left foot when in the southpaw stance, creating lines of attack that Benavidez could not easily close off. There were moments of genuine danger for Crawford in these middle rounds, flashes where Benavidez reminded everyone watching exactly why his confidence had not been entirely unfounded. His best round of the fight came somewhere around the 4th and 5th, where he drilled Crawford with combinations sharp enough to force the champion to reset and respect the power across from him. The Chi Center crowd, already highly invested in every exchange, rose with each moment of drama, and Benavidez's corner could be heard urging their man to stay on the gas, believing they were still very much in the fight. Crawford's legendary trainer, Bob McIntyre, known universally as B-Mac, was measured and precise in his instructions between rounds, the dynamic between the two men calm and efficient, even as the fight raged around them. By the time the second half of the fight began, something important had changed in Benavidez. The transformation was not sudden, but it was unmistakable. The feet, once planted with the confidence of a man who believed he could outbully anyone in front of him, were now flat and sluggish. The jab that had been his primary tool for disrupting. Crawford's rhythm had lost its snap, its authority, its menace. Fatigue had arrived not as a sudden guest, but as a slow tide, and the commentators noted with increasing certainty that the Benavidez of the early rounds and the Benavidez of the 8th and 9th rounds were almost two different fighters. The CompuBox numbers told the story with cold efficiency. Crawford was outlanding him by massive margins, total punches showing a dominant 93-63 advantage, and the gap was only growing wider with each passing minute. Crawford, sensing the shift with the instincts of a man who had been in championship rounds countless times before, increased his pace rather than cruise. Where a lesser champion might have been content to box safely and run out the clock on a clear points victory, Crawford went hunting. He resumed his assault on the body, the head, and everything in between, overwhelming Benavidez with the variety and intelligence of his attack. In the 9th round, a combination that included a sharp left to the head made Benavidez stagger for the first time, a visible confirmation of the cumulative damage that Crawford had been building across nearly 30 minutes of championship boxing. The hometown crowd erupted, sensing the end was near, and Crawford could feel it too. That electric current that runs through a great fighter when the finishing line comes into view. Benavidez, to his considerable credit, refused to simply fold. He tried everything available to him in those final rounds, at one point backing himself into a corner and motioning for Crawford to come at him, attempting to lure the champion into a brawl on his terms. Crawford, disciplined to the last, did not take the bait blindly. He came at Benavidez, yes, but on his own terms, throwing shots whenever his opponent dropped his guard, maintaining the tactical composure that had defined his entire performance. Even as Benavidez tried to drag the fight into chaos, Crawford kept it clean, kept it controlled, and kept landing. The contrast between the two men in those final rounds was stark and slightly heartbreaking. One man fighting brilliantly at the height of his powers, the other fighting with heart and pride. B.